Love podcasts, hate nonsense. The Politics Joe podcast, ladies and gentlemen. War. It's war. Everywhere is war. Who was that? Sean? Yeah, but cover version. Sinead O'Connor. SNL. Pope.
Can you appreciate that maybe why I may not have known that from your impression?
No.
Okay.
That was pitch perfect. Sinead O'Connor in her pomp.
I thought you were actually going for war. What is it good for?
Oh.
No.
Would you give me a Sinead War, Sean?
Everyone war.
That was good.
That was quite nice.
War.
The Pope just turned over.
Fight the real enemy.
We need to get the mic back in there.
Not in his grave, of course. Papal hanging on. Yeah.
Right. Reform.
Tell you who's not hanging on.
Yeah. Rupert Lowe? Is he out? He's not coming back. Surely.
Well, he's pretty much out,
He's
isn't he?
done.
I think Richard Tice sort of confirmed that yesterday, didn't he?
Nigel always wins. Right, okay.
He was asked repeatedly, wasn't he, like, will he have the whip restored? And he said he's had the whip suspended.
Right, so I thought about this. I actually got nudged at the weekend. I was with my family. I was on Twitter. I'm like, what are you doing? And I was like, Reform are having a civil war and Rupert Lowe is tweeting the receipts about Zia Youssef. And they were like, who the fuck are you talking about? So I suspect a large part of our audience is actually probably quite plugged into political Twitter. Maybe they caught some of the Sunday broadcast round in which Richard Tice, that you were just referencing. But, Ava Santina, maybe we should just do a little chronological summary, recent events, then we'll go to the past context, then maybe we'll even go back to the 90s.
I think we should go back to the 90s.
And talk about Nigel Farage and his relationship with other political figures in parties he's in. But, why don't you just give us the lowdown of sort of events of the last 48 to 72 hours?
You know, speaking of the 90s, before we go back,
Yes.
I was quite intimidated because I was on a panel with Trevor Phillips over the weekend, which I found very intimidating because he's sort of interesting, he's the Messiah, which is what one might describe Nigel Farage as. And I said, I remember in 97 with Alice, and he was like, you remember 97? And mocked me mercilessly. And I was like, do you know what, this is exactly what I didn't want to happen, being mocked by Trevor Phillips.
I never know how to handle that turn of phrase. Quite often when we're interviewing people in here, people are like, well, of course you remember Bretton Woods. And it's like, well, no, actually, I don't remember. I understand.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember it. But it's a turn of phrase, isn't it? I mean, I don't think you were saying, I literally remember Alan Sked in 1997.
I could have phrased it better, couldn't I?
Well, I suppose we always could.
But that's why they pay me not very much.
Possibly could. So essentially, what's happened over the weekend?
Right, so, we'll have to go back a little bit further, won't we?
To the 90s.
Right to the 90s. No, okay, so Rupert Lowe, in a Daily Mail article that was published last week, criticised Nigel Farage, and he said that he was the Messiah, and he questioned his ability to lead the party. He said that Farage always needed the right people around him to deliver the goods, but it was essentially his words.
Said he didn't know whether he'd make a good prime minister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty tricky, that.
Which is tough if that's the leader of your party you're talking about, because the artifice is that person would become the prime minister.
And there's been a row brewing, actually, between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage for quite some time now. Well, Rupert Lowe actually and the rest of them, but specifically this new chairman, Zia Youssef, who's been in situ now for 6 months-ish. I bet I'm trying to think, because I always had... the point I remember Zia Youssef taking over was when I suddenly had a bit of difficulty getting into one of the reform conferences, which I didn't understand.
They were professionalising the party.
They were professionalising.
Yeah.
And so, I don't fit into that category.
Can you guys hear the bins outside? Is that picking up on the record?
I can fit a bit bad.
Yeah. I guess it's just a nice bit of...
A bit of insight, if you guys would like to hear it. These bin men are like really quite cunty in the sort of like positive way.
They serve.
So this is like a one-way street, and they'll be really quick with the bins, and they're very efficient men. Okay, I say men because that's who I've seen.
Binman.
If anyone comes up behind them and starts beeping to try and hurry them up, the pace that they then move at is so glacial, and it's really quite good fun to watch.
As is their right, as is their God-given right,
Yeah.
as men of the bin. It's died
Speaking
down a
of
bit.
men put in the bin.
Yeah, men getting put in the bin, getting in the sea.
So one thing, okay, so this sort of this row that has been brewing between them has really sort of, it kicked off when Elon Musk decided during the revival of the grooming gang scandal that exploded over social media that he would endorse Rupert Lowe to be leader of the Reform Party over Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage said he would not accept convicted criminal Tommy Robinson into the Reform Party.
Yes. And there is a dividing line there between him and Rupert Lowe, because Rupert Lowe, whilst he won't, he sort of distances himself from Tommy Robinson, he won't be drawn into direct criticism of Tommy Robinson. And there is actually a dividing line there, because Nigel has always held the view that there has to be some kind of line between his political parties as the kind of acceptable face of anti-immigrant sentiment and right-wing politics in the UK, or the sort of the furthest right-wing fringes of acceptable politics in the UK, and Tommy Robinson. Even as large as Tommy Robinson looms in sort of right-wing political discourse in the UK, the view that Farage has always taken is that you cannot win an election if Tommy Robinson is part of your vehicle, right? And it's not necessarily as clear that Rupert Lowe thinks the same.
And they've already got one spent conviction amongst their group of MPs.
Yes. 20% of them.
20%.
20% of them, yeah.
Well, no, more than that now. 25%.
Yeah, 25. They need to be careful about kicking out too many more of their MPs, because that percentage of them that have assaulted women increases every time. A quarter of them now. You can say a quarter of Reform MPs.
I stand by, I don't think it matters electorally for them.
Oh, no,
Sorry.
I don't think...
Not in principle.
Okay. And how was International Women's Day?
Yeah. Hit me.
Right, okay, so there's tension. There's tension simmering away. Elon does his tweeting. He's undermining Nigel publicly. But how does that lead us to both Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage writing in the Telegraph about each other? How does that lead to the very public tweeting of internal party affairs? Like, tie it all together for us.
That was a pretty broad question, and I was hoping that was one that we could develop over the
Okay, sure. Well, we'll
podcast.
answer that question over the course of the following 35 minutes. But what's the next step then? What's the next step after Elon's tweets?
That was a while ago now. That was but so after Elon's tweets, you then had Rupert Lowe builds traction on Twitter, and he's really outdoing Nigel Farage, right? And there's a sense that he's getting a little bit above his station. In terms of the hierarchy of that party, right? He's actually taking a line on immigration that Nigel Farage wouldn't. There's a pattern here, which is interesting, because you've also seen it with Ben Habib, who we'll come to shortly, where both of those candidates actually became too right-wing for Nigel Farage, and they no longer fit into the Reform Party.
It's quite a damning indictment of British politics, isn't it? That Nigel Farage has become the cordon sanitaire against the extreme right. It's what the last remaining bulwark against Tommy Robinson in British politics is Nigel Farage. But the holdout to Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe is Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage, the gatekeeper of the Overton window, keeping it sane.
I'm not even confident that actually Rupert Lowe really does fit into that party. I'm not actually confident he does. Yeah, I do think that he's actually a little bit more sort of like right-wing Tory adjacent. I think he would fit in better there than he would into the Reform Party. The bottles now.
Yeah.
All right. So then Reform put out this. So this all happens last week. Around 48 hours later, this statement comes out from Reform, and in it lists 2 parliamentary complaints from women against Rupert Lowe, and it also says it alleges that Rupert Lowe has made threats against their party chairman, Zia Youssef. Those have been passed over to the police.
Which Rupert Lowe denies in the strongest possible terms.
Well, no, but not even, he hasn't even denied it once. He's denied it publicly all weekend on Twitter. Yeah. And he started from a rather amicable meet me in the marketplace of a lunch.
Oh, he invited Nigel for lunch, didn't he? He said, let's settle this like gentlemen.
Yes.
The good old days.
that has Nigel Farage doubled down. Presumably, this piece had already been sent to print with the Telegraph. It went out on Saturday's Telegraph, didn't it? But he doubled down in that, where he just said, "Look, nope, investigation is investigation. Tough shit. We move on." It's
funny, isn't it? That it kind of has the trappings of a political party handling a scandal, where the leader says, well, an investigation is now underway and I wouldn't want to prejudice the investigation and therefore I will not be commenting further. And instead, Reform are tweeting being like, we have instructed a KC as a result of these 2 specific complaints from women that you are a bully.
Yeah.
Oh, and you assaulted. We allege that you intimidated our chairman. And then Nigel Farage writes, and he's like, oh, and by the way, you pushed one of the government ministers in after a heated engagement in the chamber, and you realise that the rest of the time when like Keir Starmer, I think of Keir Starmer and Diane Abbott, or any of the many Conservative scandals and how the Prime Minister addressed them, and you always go, man, you are so limp-dicked in the way that you're talking about this. But it's because the alternative, where they actually start to detail the things that are happening, it just comes across as so juvenile and like pathetic. And schoolyard, and I don't want to minimise the severity of any of the allegations that are being thrown around here. But when you're going, no, actually, well, I didn't do that, but you did do this, and no, you did that, and I haven't even spoken to the KC. Why isn't he texting me? It's like, you look like a little bitch. You do,
especially one that doesn't believe women.
Well, yes, exactly.
We don't have to anymore. That's the watershed moment after International Women's Day.
Where
for the rest of the year, you can get away with it.
Great. So we can drop a bitch on the podcast.
Yeah.
You can drop an anatomical cunt.
Sure.
Maybe even a fanny.
An anatomical cunt.
That's the one that alarms me when you do that one.
I know.
Yeah.
It's strange, that, isn't it?
When you're being literal.
Yeah.
With the word. It's very affronting. Very accunting.
Confronting, maybe.
Good.
Confronting?
There's something in that.
There's something
we'll
there.
We'll workshop it later. Where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. Free speech.
Okay.
These guys are out there saying these people, like Southport, people shouldn't be in prison for tweeting the stuff that writing the stuff they wrote on Facebook. And Reform are now clutching their pearls. Rupert Lowe, you intimidated our chairman. But can those two things sit in tandem with each other?
We don't actually know what he did to the chairman.
Allegedly. No, we don't.
So
I look forward to finding that out.
Well, actually, I thought my statement actually was fine. We don't know what he did to the chairman, because that could be nothing.
Correct.
And it could be everything.
I'm being pathetic.
Yeah. Not a free speech advocate here. There was this interesting point. So straight after, almost immediately after this row breaks out on Twitter, Ben Habib comes to the rescue. Now, Ben Habib is rather embittered with Reform UK, specifically Nigel Farage, because he quit the party last November, again citing, similarly to Rupert Lowe, citing concerns over the party's structure and fundamental differences with Nigel Farage over Brexit and disagreements with migration. The disagreements with migration actually goes back to what I was saying about Rupert Lowe being too right-wing. Ben Habib wanted mass deportations. He was sort of like more...
Lowe as well.
Yeah, exactly. Carte blanche. And Farage was like, actually, I like some of the people that are here.
Yeah, Lowe also, I think, opposes indefinite leave to remain for several 100,000. The people that are currently waiting to be processed, he just wants to get rid of as well. There is a difference, though, isn't there? I think Rupert Lowe is a bigger beast than Ben Habib.
I think we're splitting hairs.
Yeah, fair.
Do you know what I mean?
There is a recurring theme which I think the listeners will pick up on, that repeatedly throughout any of these political vehicles, and they are essentially political vehicles, right? Whether it's UKIP, the Brexit Party, Reform, I think you can the correct way to essentially understand them is as cults of personality that exist around Nigel Farage, right? And for that reason, you look at how Reform was doing when it was led by Richard Tice, and Farage wasn't directly involved in it. And the second he returns, and the impact that has on the general election, what it does to Reform's polling, and all of a sudden it's 5 MPs, and now there's been multiple polls that put them ahead of either of the two parties.
Well, Tice would argue that they were on 14 points before Farage came back.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to sort of say that they hadn't achieved anything without Nigel, but what I mean to say is he joins, and all of a sudden it's fucking like through the roof, right? We've got some momentum now. And I guess the challenge for Nigel, for Reform, or for any other political party political business that he starts in the future and leads.
Political business.
Shade. There is also a ceiling because it essentially relies on Nigel Farage. There's a certain number of people in the country who love him, and there's a pretty significant chunk of people in the country who really dislike him. And as a result, the previous thinking was always that he would be around 20% was kind of his ceiling of where he could get to. The challenge for Reform, to my mind, and I suspect to other people's mind, is if they are going to become a broad tent political party that houses like a multiplicity of opinions and views and has other political figures within it that aren't just Nigel Farage, there has to be some kind of reconciliation here between, you can't chop down every tall poppy that appears in your party, right? You can't have a monopoly over the political positions of the party. And crucially, and I think this is why one of the reasons Habib left, and it's one of the things that Rupert Lowe has cited as well, is the kind of lack of internal party democracy, the sort of democratic input towards the party's policies. Because at the end of the day, there's a 200,000 member organisation at this point,
4 million votes at the election.
You can't keep operating it as they did with what was their contract with the people? Was that what they called their manifesto?
Yeah.
And it's like, exempting nurses from income tax and stuff like that.
Farage has handed back control now, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I'm going to say something. I think I feel like it this morning. I just feel like getting some really angry emails this morning.
Oh, okay.
Is this not similar to the way that Starmer has been running the Labour Party for the last couple of years?
Centralised.
Tall poppy, chop it down.
Yeah.
Because some of the criticism as well about Zia Youssef as chairman is that he has been stifling local branches from electing certain candidates. And I hate to tell you this. That's what was happening just before the election.
All as bad as each other, perhaps.
Some of the selection processes were deemed a little bit unfair.
Yeah. Oh, there's only one person on the shortlist, and it's Paul Mason. No.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Another Blairite. Come on down, Tony Blair.
This was it. What did Lee Anderson get kicked out of the Tory party for? Who's now the chief whip and who's been the central character in this? And by the way, Rupert Lowe hasn't just pissed off Zia Youssef. It sounds like he's pissed off every single Reform MP.
Zia Youssef?
Sorry, Rupert Lowe has pissed off every other Reform MP. He's not just pissed off Zia Youssef. What was Lee Anderson kicked out of the Tory party for?
I think you'll find it was a matter of free speech.
Yes, exactly. Speaking too freely, Ava Santina, on the issue of immigration. So you think he might...
No, hang on. No, that is not what happened.
Go on.
Did he not say that it was about Sadiq Khan? And he said...
Yeah, he said something about Sadiq Khan, yeah.
Did he not say...
Mates with Islamists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Islamists. And then there was...
So you mean a freeborn Englishman exercising his right to free speech? Have you read Magna Carta? No, so...
I think Sadiq Khan would probably say that, just describing someone...
who is Muslim as being mates with terrorists.
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I have a problem with that too. For the interest of clarity, when I described Lee Anderson saying that as a freeborn Englishman exercising his right to free speech, that was a joke.
Right.
But Lee Anderson gets kicked out of the Tory party. Was the whip suspended and he defects. And I would say becomes a bit of a thorn in the Tory party's side.
Yeah, for that moment in time, absolutely.
Should he learn the lesson here and not necessarily kick Rupert Lowe out of the party for dissenting? Might be a little bit of learning from his own, what might call lived experiences.
Right, I see.
That was a side note, anyway.
They sort of... I suppose the cat got let out of the bag quite early, right? And I guess the trump card with Rupert Lowe was played rather early on in this argument, which is that once you've alleged that one of your MPs has potentially bullied two women and allegedly threatened your chairman and it's gone to the police, very difficult to then row back on that and have this sort of semblance of unity. Pretty difficult.
Particularly when you go public, right?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Those are pretty heavy allegations. I thought what would be good fun is to go through apropos of nothing, a couple of spats that Nigel Farage has had with other politicians in his parties over the year.
Very good.
Thought you might enjoy that. So, you might remember in 1997.
Skedders.
Alan Sked, he would describe himself as almost like a sort of philosopher. He opposed...
Philosopher King.
Yeah, Philosopher King. He opposed the EU, the EU's bureaucracy, and he opposed them on a sort of intellectual grounds, right? And then he perceived Nigel Farage and his presence in UKIP as, well, I think he described him as being obsessed with Muslims. And he said that he transformed the party into, it was unrecognisable after Nigel Farage had his way. Nigel Farage leads a campaign against him, and he ousts Alan Sked, and he takes over as the head of state. There was a really good, fun spat with Douglas Carswell, who you might remember as a former Tory MP.
Defector, yeah. UKIP's first MP.
And now what happened was, so early March 2017, this story leaks to the papers about how Douglas Carswell has potentially blocked an attempt to get Nigel Farage a knighthood, because obviously Carswell was a former Tory MP and he was still in with that lot. He potentially blocked it. Farage is absolutely furious. This gets relayed to the NEC at UKIP. But before any of this can actually get settled, on March 26th, Carswell quits UKIP. And that was a worse ratio than what Reform has now, because he was 100% of UKIP MPs. So there was more of a drop-off there.
So what you're saying is there's a pattern of behaviour.
I would never suggest something like that.
Wherein, within Nigel Farage's political vehicles, and look, don't get me wrong, I think for anyone, you don't have to like Farage's politics to objectively say he is probably one of the most gifted political communicators for a generation.
Oh, careful when you say that. People get really angry when you say that.
I've got no doubt. But I'm past caring.
Cool.
Santina. I'm past caring.
Given up, yeah?
Yeah. I would say the most influential politician, I would say it's a toss-up between him and Blair since Thatcher, for the most influential political figures in Britain.
Well, possibly more influential, right? Because Blair wanted the euro. And Farage took us out of the EU.
It's kind of,
Kidding.
No, I know you are, but I think that in Blair's, the way Blair changed Britain is softer, and it's more, what people like Rupert Lowe actually would say is that it's kind of, it's a cultural, it's the Quangoisation of government, and it's the colossal expansion of DEI. By the way, if you get a chance to listen to like an extended interview with Rupert Lowe, I highly recommend it, because there's a lot of anti-DEI chat. There's a lot of wanting to doge Britain. There's a lot of I didn't get the jab, greatest medical experiment in history. Yeah, like there is some real good stuff. He said he fears the state.
Alternatively, you could just go and read your Twitter timeline.
Yeah, he does tweet a lot as well.
No. And what I mean is, I think that he pretty much just regurgitates what he sees on X.
He represents a new strain in the British right. Or more broadly, actually, probably just, I think the correct way actually to understand sort of small c conservative or just sort of right-wing political grouping now is Atlanticist, and particularly...
Atlanticist?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Where you see these organisations like, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC, who are holding that conference, Jordan Peterson, Paul Marshall, the funding that goes into these institutions, be it the Legatum Institute and the causes that they support, they are trying to build this sort of cohesive right-wing grouping of thinkers and political figures, right? And they are trying to do it together. And Lowe is an example of this sort of new online radical right, whether it's his position, because if you think about,
he's a bit Suella Braverman adjacent, though. Do you not think?
Yeah, no, for sure. And he's very he doesn't refer to the grooming gangs. He calls them Pakistani rape gangs, right? Which
actually is more. That's. Hang on a minute. I think the problem would be if he was calling them the Muslim grooming gangs.
So, the reason he calls them the Pakistani rape gangs is because he argues that, as Suella Braverman did, and was censured for doing so, that the vast majority, well, Suella Braverman said almost all, and Rupert Lowe would say the majority of the offenders are Pakistani men.
Yeah.
when you look at the data of group-based child sexual abuse, it's 85% white, the perpetrators.
Fine, okay. But in that specific case that they're talking about...
Yeah, but he's not. This is the thing. He's not talking about
all of them.
He's talking about all of it.
Okay, fine.
He's not, and that is the reason why. And I appreciate some people might think this is like a real nitpicky. Why are you obsessing over the terminology here? And it's hard because there isn't actually a complete data set. We only have about when it comes to child sexual abuse, the ethnicity of the offenders is only recorded in about 30% of cases. So you're always going to struggle to sort of draw big conclusions. But we've got 30% of the data. All right, let's extrapolate it. 85% of the offenders are white. 85% of the country's population is white. You go, doesn't really seem to me to be that much of a disparity. When you segment it down, all the way down, and you exclude church-based, like religious group-based, sports club-based, still group offending, at that point, Pakistani men are overrepresented compared to what they are in the population. But the argument goes, you have segmented the data down to such a sort of specific point that it's not actually particularly that representative, and you have to ask if you want to make it that specific and therefore reach the conclusion that Pakistani men are overrepresented, maybe perhaps it's because you want to say something about Pakistani men and Pakistani people rather than come to a conclusion about group-based child sexual exploitation. I appreciate it's a bit sort of like epistemological, but nonetheless. Anyway, so he's very much like, no, they are Pakistani rape gangs, which Suella Braverman, you're right, got in a lot of trouble for when she said it in that interview when she wrote it in the Mail on Sunday.
Well, hang on a minute. She went a bit further than that. Oh no, Kemi Badenoch though, she had a great line, didn't she?
What was that one on?
Peasants. We're getting the peasants.
They're not sending their best.
Which is a direct import from America, right?
Yes, yeah. They're not sending their best. Yeah, okay, that's prime Trump.
But do you know who's actually a great player in all of the sort of the attempts to
tell me
Americanize or sort of join forces with the American right? Liz Truss, because no one ever pays attention to her, and she tries so hard. She has been spouting some of the worst rhetoric you've seen in a really long time. Okay, She's really pulled herself to the right. If you go and look at her Twitter feed, no one cares. No one even writes it out.
She's quite pathetic in that sense, in like the sort of classical Greek sense, like as in evoking pathos, like you pity her.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, because it is.
Yeah.
Okay, it was only 44 days. Nonetheless, you're a former prime minister of the country, right? And you're begging it. And it is so unedifying to watch you, someone who held one of the great, a person who will go down is in history as our shortest ever prime minister. Not for the reason she'd want to go down in history, but nonetheless, she is there. And that's who we have. That's the bridge, apparently.
Did she not have lunch with Rupert Lowe the other week? I think they were pictured together having lunch.
Really?
It kind of felt a little bit, I suppose it's quite apprentice bridge cafe, isn't it? Let's just pull this all back because, okay, so the point about Nigel Farage having these rather public spats with certain politicians. So first Alan Scared, he has a spat with Douglas Carswell, he has a spat with Ben Habib, and now Rupert Lowe. But if you track this, all of the, okay, let's think about those politicians had they been sitting in the Conservative Party, because the Conservatives were always raring, right? We had like 4 years of absolutely insane drama, crossing the floor. We had what? Natalie Elphicke crossing the floor at the last minute just before the election, didn't we? But we had Christian Wakeford as well, who still sits as a Labour MP, who used to be a Conservative. There was always infighting. And then you think about the straw that broke the camel's back, I suppose, was when Rishi Sunak decided to leave, right? But before that, you had people like Sajid Javid resigning, and that was massive. Rupert Lowe, similarly to Douglas Carswell, doesn't quite have that sort of Tory collegiate understanding of how to do politicking. When something becomes slightly unsatisfactory to them, they just sort of lose it, right? They just want the chains off of them and they start screaming to the press. Yeah. And that's not the way that you do politicking. You have to basically line up your grievances until you're about to explode, and then you have to
destroy someone.
Yes.
But you're right though, because Farage said in his piece, he was like, what has the last 5 years taught us is that the electorate hates party political infighting.
Yeah.
And so here I am, writing in the Telegraph, excoriating up until now, probably one of the stars of my party. You know,
I don't know if he is a star of the party.
I think he is.
I think that he is. No, I actually think he's a problem. He's a thorn in the side for reform because he's extraordinarily popular on X, which is not real life, right? A lot of the stuff that you're seeing on X at the moment is overinflated by, but not even bots, but just sort of like a lot of American people who can't vote in our elections. You're telling me that when he's getting 22,000 likes on a post that says deport everyone, do you think they're coming from the UK? They're not.
Yeah, look, I think some of it's from the UK, but I also think it's kind of irrelevant because at the end of the day, if half of all engagements with MPs' Twitter accounts are happening on the 5 Reform MPs' accounts, as they recently were, it doesn't matter where they come from because that level of engagement gives you exceptional timeline distribution, right? Like,
yeah, sure, and it gets you in the papers.
You're treated as this thing, particularly I think in a world of new politics where, you know, writing an op-ed, you know, as Rishi Sunak, for example, did in the Times this weekend, talking about the need to deploy frozen Russian assets to sort of fund the reconstruction of Ukraine, for example. That's all well and good, and you know, you access sort of thought leaders, you access informed sort of Westminster establishment types, and I don't want to diminish, you know, the newspaper of record, like the Times, but nonetheless, Rupert Lowe is commanding attention, and it's quite American in that sense. The level of reach, the level of engagement, the way he's manipulating it on social media. Now, I think you're absolutely right that is not the real world, and it goes hand in hand, right? So whereas Trump behaves like that on social media, it's combined with ground war from Republican activists, MAGA activists, huge, like, you know, rallies. That's where he loves giving these sort of in-person events, and also traditional broadcasts. He's all over Fox News. He's all over these other places, and they pick up on what he posts on social media. So you're right. You cannot just win an election with podcasts. However, Reform is now the second largest by membership political party in the UK. And it would be foolish of us to think that some of those 200,000, a significant chunk of those 200,000 people are not paying attention to Rupert Lowe's social media.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
And that is where, and I think that's where Rupert Lowe's point about, because I think he is, you know, very popular within the party, his points about internal party democracy come from. But you are right, because I think if we went out onto the street and stopped 100 people and said, what do you make of this Rupert Lowe business? They wouldn't know who we were talking about.
Yeah.
But if we said, oh, what do you make of the row that Nigel Farage is having with one of his MPs? They might not know necessarily the specifics of it, but they certainly know who Nigel Farage is, and they certainly know what Reform is, if you know what I mean. And unless they were like a Southampton supporter, they wouldn't have a fucking clue who Rupert Lowe was.
Wow. One thing I thought was really interesting, I know that we've got to wrap up, but I would love to add in. Do you know I went to Cheltenham a few months ago in January to cover one of their launch events, their relaunch events, Reform?
Yep.
Zia Youssef, the chairman, gave a speech in which he said he actually lamented the point about rallying behind Nigel Farage and that we cannot be splintered as a party, we cannot be broken. And I was really confused when he said it at the time because I was like, where's that come from? Has there been splits? Do you know who didn't turn up that day? Rupert Lowe.
Yeah.
He wasn't there.
You're so right. And you've seen murmurings. They had a big announcement about green energy subsidies and battery technology. Tice went out and made a big song and dance about it. All of their MPs tweeted about it, apart from Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe, who owns a business that owns battery storage for energy for the mass market. And you sort of looked at it and go, why are Reform doing this? Are they doing it to like personally injure and attack Rupert Lowe? I went back and listened to a podcast appearance that Rupert Lowe did, I think it was a couple of months ago, and he gets asked about Zia Youssef, and he's like, well, I don't really know Zia Youssef.
Wow.
And as you've said, he was party chairman for several months at that point.
Yeah.
And it's almost with the hindsight, you look back at that speech in Cheltenham that you're just mentioning, or Rupert Lowe's comments in the media, and you go, oh yeah, this has been fucking bubbling away for a long, long, long old time. And it's come to the surface, broken out into public, and here we are. Do you think Rupert Lowe will be a Reform MP by the time we get to summer recess?
Crazier things have happened.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they
could reconcile.
They might go through the investigation, all clear him, and then say apologise and go, do you see those those stupid women who alleged.
Yeah, just like that
James
other
is gonna
stupid
take
woman.
care of them.
Yeah, same way. Deny, defend, depose. Ava Santina, reform in open civil war. What a way to start the week.
I know.
What a way to start the week. Another podcast tomorrow. Is there a PMQs on Wednesday? Feels like there's probably going to be a PMQs on Wednesday.
I think we're going straight through now to April, aren't we?
Yeah, bam, bam, bam.
Because Easter is late this year, of course.
Wham, bam, thank
Will
you,
the
ma'am.
Pope make it to Easter? Drop a comment.
Wow. Sean, can I get another war?
Everywhere is war.
He's getting better. He's been
Lovely.
he's been thinking about that over the course of the record. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, He Who Should Not Be Named. Thank you, Ava. An absolute pleasure doing business with you on this fine Monday morning. We'll see you all on the next one. Goodbye.